Richie, I'll let you start this one off just because I know it means a little more to you, but I'll try and provide some perspective and some thoughts on this as well. But we were both in Tallahassee last night for Coach Ham's last game. A really cool win for the Seminoles, which to me was not most important, but really important. I did not want to see them lose. They were an underdog. I mean, shout out the team. I mean, I know they're not great. I know they've not had the season anybody would have wanted. I'd say they probably met expectations, though. Like, I don't know what the expectations for this team truly were. So I'd say probably, you can kind of opine on that more. But I was really glad as an underdog, they found a way to win last night in a game they really led the whole way. Like, SMU fought back and took the lead a couple of times. But, man, once they took the lead around the 20s, like they kind of not dominated, but they always had that, 4 to 6 to 8 point lead. And they ended up winning it, 76 to 69. A really fun game to see Florida State come out on top. And it reminds me, it's very different, but I was at Kobe's last game. The Lakers were terrible that year. I don't think they won 20 games, but they won the last game of Kobe's career. And it just made the crescendo a little bit better, a little sweeter than having lost. Can you imagine doing those post-game interviews and stuff if they had lost, both Kobe and Coach Ham? So I thought that was cool that they won, and just a really cool night to be in Tallahassee for sure.
Yeah, very special night. Honestly, a really good atmosphere. It stinks that the students were on spring break, so the student section was basically empty. But still, the people that were there all wanted to be there and were there for a reason, myself included. And I just did not. I was going to be there to celebrate Coach Ham regardless. I know these last few years have not been great, but what he did at Florida State was truly tremendous. We were a cellar dweller. And we had about a 10-year stretch where we were a top 4 team in the ACC almost every single year. Brought Florida State our first ACC championship in the postseason. And my favorite in 2020 when he won the ACC championship outright, because I think winning the regular season conference title in college basketball means way more than just getting hot for 3 or 4 games in March. That was really special. Seeing so many former players, got to catch up with a lot of former players that I've had the pleasure of meeting in the past. Derwin Kitchens was there in his game jersey. Is a little snug on him now. So Derwin, if you're listening, just saying. John Kreft had his jersey on. Got to catch up with Isaiah Swan, who was a player my freshman year back in 2006. And I got to go to the game with my wife and then 3 people who I met in college, literally in the Noles Zone, back when the Noles Zone had the sidelines. I'm not going to say anything. Some changes might come into the Noles Zone. But yeah, it was just a special night. And I love that every single media timeout, they had a former player or a former assistant provide a video message to Coach Ham. If you know Coach Ham, he did not want that night to be all about him, but it absolutely had to be. The only disappointing thing to me was I really was hoping that they were going to name the court after him. But it was awesome. After the game, they had a big ceremony. I was lucky enough to be able to get down on the court and get a picture with Coach Ham in his last game. But yeah, to your point, TJ, the game, I'll say this much. It never felt like the outcome was truly in doubt. Yeah, it was a close game throughout, but it's not like we're down 12 points with 10 minutes left in the second half. They kind of controlled the whole game. And I will say those players were fighting for Ham. They played as hard as you could imagine. And it was evident from where we were sitting in the stands. And I'm just so happy that he got to go out on a high note. He made a comment that, some teams after the game, he made a comment to the whole arena that, sometimes 1, 2, 3, 4 teams just get hot in March. They go on a run, they make the tournament, and you never know what can happen. I'm not sitting here telling you Florida State's going to win a national title. They probably will not make the NCAA tournament. They'd probably have to win the ACC tournament just to get there. But, just to see that he still has that fight in him, at least for another, 3 or 4 weeks, it was awesome. And like I said, he's meant so much to me as a Florida State basketball fan. You mentioned I probably care about Florida State basketball more than most Florida State casual fans. And he has been the coach, basically my entire fandom of Florida State.
All right, just before we get back to the video, I do want to give some love to our friends over at Russo and Company. Chris Russo, a CPA since 2002. He's had his MBA. He's got a law degree. He's got 25 plus years of experience in a ton of different industries, such as entertainment, nonprofit, construction, restaurants, sole proprietors, and medical. make sure that if you have a business or you need any tax consulting, tax advice, you haven't filed your taxes yet, he can do some personal stuff too. But truly, if you have a business, make sure that you're reaching out to him just so that he can take a look over what you've got. He'll do a free consultation if you mention double fries, no slaw, whether you need cash reconciliations, paywall processing, you need 1099 or W-2 preparation, any kind of policy or procedure implementation or drafting, income tax planning and preparation, he will take care of you. He's a nole just like you and I are. He absolutely cannot stand the IRS. He will treat your money as if it's his own, and he will fight for every single cent of your money. You can get his info in the description. It's also russocoflorida.com or 407-636-1152. Appreciate Chris Russo for his support. Yeah, no, same. What did you get there in 2003? So I remember a little bit of FSU hoops before that, but growing up, like Al Thornton was kind of like the first, my introduction. Al Thornton and Tony Douglas and those guys like that. Yeah, mid 2000s. We weren't great, but they were fun to watch. Man, those guys could take over some games, and he obviously he was there for all of that, right? And then the times where they were really bad, post those guys, Von Wafer, those are probably my top 3 players ever,
Tim Pickett.
Yeah. Oh, Pickett's up there too. Yeah. That's probably my top 4. If I'm telling you, Pickett, Von Wafer. Yeah. Not really the recent guys. And I love Snare. Luke, obviously the coach, talk about him for just a sec, but I liked, the 2012 team was obviously way up there. And then Bacon and Beasley and Isaac and the guys that they've had recently are way, way up there. XRM. But man, yeah, you kind of remember back to the guys you grew up with, right? That's why if you talk with older guys, they like Charlie more than Jameis, right? Because that's who they were watching, right? When it started. So Pickett, Von Wafer, Tony Douglas, and Al Thornton are my top 2 for sure. But that's my Mount Rushmore of FSU basketball players. I loved those guys, and I remember we hate Raycom now because everything that's come out with the ACC. But I remember watching them on the local Raycom channels and stuff. You'd watch them on channel 38 or whatever here in Tampa, and those were so much fun. And so yeah, it was cool to see all those guys come back. It was cool to see his teammates come back, all those old white guys. And he's like, yeah, I didn't really look like my teammates back then. He wasn't afraid to call it out and be kind of funny. They had the gospel singer out there singing.
That was amazing.
Yeah, before all that, before he came out and spoke, and it was just such a cool moment. And I know the FSU hoops hasn't really been what Florida State fans would want it to be over these last few years, and there's certainly been a decline since 2020, 2021, that time frame. But it was cool to go out with a nice moment. And like you said, yeah, who do they play? They play Syracuse first, is that right?
Yes. Yep, Syracuse.
Go win that, and they should.
And they blew Syracuse out in the regular season. So
yeah.
You never know. It's March.
Bad. Go win that. And then the next one is SMU, right? Who you just beat, and I know they'll have a little revenge on their minds for sure. And SMU's had some nice wins this year. So, but you could win 2. And if you win 2, you're in the final 4, right? And I don't think anybody's beaten Duke, but even to win 2 in Charlotte would be kind of all right, well, this feels pretty good.
And I don't know, how fitting was it that it was Andy Enfield on the opposite sideline of Coach Hamilton, a guy who really, when Coach Ham brought him in, I don't know how many people truly remember this. Florida State was one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the country. Ham makes an amazing hire in Andy Enfield, and he comes in, and Florida State is top 2 in the country in free throw shooting. He literally turned our shooting completely around. Then everyone obviously remembers him at Dunk City when he's at Florida Gulf Coast. Then he went to USC. It kind of pushed out the USC a little bit at SMU now, which is not a bad place to be. But yeah, it was just a lot of full circle moments that just made the night really special.
Yeah. Somewhat helpful that he knows the landscape. He knows what Florida State's, let's be very frank, limitations are with basketball. They're never going to fund a roster that is going to be a top 20 paid roster in college basketball like they do in football. But I think that's a big pro. I think maybe a reservation that I have is he obviously hasn't coached college, right? He's coming from the NBA. So I think there's pros and cons to everything, but I think there's some benefit if you were going to go get a guy that didn't have a crap ton of college experience or anything like that, or, go the G5 route that, Florida did and has found a lot of success with. If you go get a guy that at least understands the culture, understands the limitations, somebody that's probably not going to get poached, even if he does have success, you're going to be able to keep him in tally if it works out. There's a lot of benefits to that. So I don't know. I like Luke coming back. I'm certainly not trying to sound anti that or anything like that. I just don't know enough to oh man, here's what he does from an X's and O's perspective that's really going to make us successful. I don't know that. I'm not going to pretend to know that. Chris Nee or somebody like that's probably a better source to try and pull, pick his brain about it. And I'm sure he's written about it a ton. You can go check out at Noles 24/7. But what are your thoughts on Luke coming in?
He was in my top two of realistic hires, right? Um, it was him and Sam Cassell for me. And that sounds weird because typically I'm not a huge fan of schools hiring former players that played at that school because if when it doesn't work out, it just gets messy and it's nasty and you don't like that. But I think he has the definite experience needed, obviously a 4-year player at Florida State and, a solid point guard from Florida. And with the NBA experience, obviously NIL is going to play a massive role in building a roster. But who else could we have hired that said, yeah, I've worked with the Warriors and Steph Curry, and I've been with the Sac Kings. Um, you know, his resume is pretty impressive for what he's done. He literally, and he wouldn't do this. He could show up to the introductory press conference with a NBA championship ring on if he wanted to, because he has a couple of those. Um, I think getting someone younger is a really good move. Um, I'm pretty excited. I was told by somebody yesterday that they would make the announcement official today, but I was told not to say that yesterday. So I had to, after a few beers after the game, not get on Twitter and try and be source guy. But it was I was excited. I'm talking to my wife at dinner about Luke. She's like, I don't know who this guy is. I'm like, no, he's awesome. He's awesome. He's but yeah, he's. I think it's as good of a hire as you could have made, and I'm assuming we got him at a pretty generous price. Not that that is the end all be all, but you know, you weren't going to get Dennis Gates, right? You just weren't. What Mizzou can offer to pay and what we can offer to pay is just not even in the same stratosphere. So I'm excited about this hire. I know for a fact Luke cares about the program. I've met him before. Extremely nice guy, very humble, but also very tenacious. And I think he's going to hold his players to the same level that Ham has held his players to in terms of not just what you do on the court at practice, but what you do off the court. I think that's such an underrated aspect of Coach Hamilton is you never read about any of his players in the newspaper off the court. I think Luke Loucks will definitely keep that same mentality. It'll be a high integrity program. How good will they be? Can they get back to conference championship contenders? I don't know, but I do really like the hire.
Yeah, I almost wonder if in the best case scenario is that Luke is able to build this up into a program of a very solid kind of floor of competing to consistently be a bubble team. And then if he has done that, understanding that unless things just completely go off the rails in 5 or so years, when Florida State, to go back to our first segment, when Florida State's ideally in another conference and can invest more into the program. Because I do think that any program Florida State has, they want to be really successful for. They're always up around the top 20-ish of the Directors Cup. In 5 years, with more resources, could they go to kind of that next level? And I don't think they'll ever truly be at a point where they're competing consistently for national championships or anything like that. But can they get back to the point of, hey, they've been a bubble team a couple of years, they've snuck into the tournament here and there under Luke. Can they, if they get to the SEC or the Big Ten, can they then fight for some Sweet 16s, be a top 5, 6 seed, instead of just sneaking in late or playing in the Final Four or the first four or whatever. So that would be like a kind of a realistic best case scenario, is that they improve a little bit upon where they're at this year, win a few more games along the way, build up the floor of the program, have it be kind of a respectable program, go out. And Luke needs to kind of do what some of the other programs like softball have done with fundraising. Like Lonnie does a great job with fundraising for her program specifically. And I think that's something that could make it, a kind of a wait and see thing of, okay, well, 5 years into this thing, we get some new resources and some new life into this program and all programs. Can we consistently kind of compete at a higher level? So
yeah, well, there's a another program in the conference who just replaced a long tenured legend with a former point guard. Granted, they have a guy named Cooper Flagg, which is kind of a nice thing to have, and that's worked out really well so far. So maybe we're just following that Duke model and watch out Duke because Luke's coming.
We're coming for you, Duke. No pressure.
Luke has the best assist in Florida State history when he hit snare in Cameron Indoor for that game winner.
I think the first time that Florida State goes up there will be pretty fun. Maybe we'll have to do a 1-day trip up there for that next year.